Good afternoon. I'm calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I'm the chair of this committee. And I'm joined today by Council Members Warsame, Fry, Council President Johnson, and Council Member Andrew Johnson. We are a quorum of the committee. We have 3 items on the agenda for today. The first is a presentation of a Metropolitan Council policy positions document. And Mr. Ranieri, are you going to introduce that for us?
Madam Chair, I will. My name is Gene Ranieri. I'm the Director of Government Relations. This is the first time the city has adopted policies, discussed policies for adoption regarding the Metropolitan Council. Ms. Olson has been working for several months on this issue with city staff, yourselves, and also Met Council members to come up with this document. She will be presenting it. I guess you can stop as you go along for questions, and I'll turn it over now to Lauren.
Thank you, and welcome, Ms. Olson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Council members. I'm Lauren Olson, Government Relations Representative. I'm here to present to you some potential Met Council policy positions. As you know, we have state positions and federal government positions, and this is the first time that we are looking at adopting some regional governance-related positions. As Jean said, I've been working with staff to kind of prepare a draft for your consideration and look forward to seeing this take shape over time. As you know, the Met Council is represents a 7-county metro area, and there could be disagreement within the 7 counties and the communities within those counties about the role of the Met Council and policy direction. So we think there is value to share some of our general vision as a city about the role of the Met Council and then some specific recommendations. I'm not going to go through every recommendation because we don't have time, so I will provide a high-level overview, we can certainly do that if you'd like to, but I'm going to provide a higher-level overview, and please stop me as we go if I move too fast. First and foremost, again, I want to, because there is disagreement in the region and in the state about the role of the Met Council, I want to acknowledge that the city supports the role of the Metropolitan Council in general, that we see a lot of value in having that regional perspective. It is necessary in order to tackle some of the biggest problems and challenges that we have as a region, addressing the racial disparities, addressing climate impacts, and also to maximize on the opportunities that we have as a region, our talented workforce, our great resources. So we see a lot of value, and the Met Council can also help deliver services efficiently, transit and wastewater. As we look at any policies at the city or any level, we look through all our Minneapolis values, including a lens of racial equity. Deep racial disparities exist in many areas of life, housing, transportation, employment, wealth. And Minneapolis recognizes that reducing or eliminating these disparities is necessary to the vitality of the city and the region. And we look at Met Council policies through this lens as well. The following sections correspond to what the elements of a Minneapolis comprehensive plan or every city's comprehensive plan include. So starting with land use, the primary theme that you will find in the land use section is that Minneapolis supports compact development patterns because those best leverage all the investments that are being made by the Met Council in water and transit and development. They also leverage those private investments. They tend to be more environmentally friendly. And these are also the type of development patterns that people increasingly want in their places to live. So a lot of the specific policies encouraging transit-oriented development, supporting infill development, and requiring minimum density before we make regional investments feed into that overall theme. There are some specific recommendations that we're making regarding Livable Communities Act grants, and I will just highlight a couple here. Currently, the Livable Communities demonstration account is no more than 40% should be given to Minneapolis and St. Paul according to guidelines. However, the Met Council does have discretion to award more than that. And at this point, we are just wish to remind them that they do have that discretion and they should feel free to utilize it. On the tax-based revitalization account, no more than 50% of those funds can go to any single municipality in the metro area. That's another example where we think that restriction is not needed, and ultimately, grant dollars should be going to the projects that best meet the grant criteria and best benefit the region overall. Also, currently, there are insufficient resources when we want to prepare land for future development, but do not have a precise project in mind, and we would encourage looking at different resources for that purpose. On the topic of transportation, obviously transit is very important, and the Met Council is, provides metro transit services. These are some of the different priorities that we want the Met Council to consider when they're making decisions about transit investments. We want to continue to serve those existing riders and not just focus on new ridership. Sometimes federal formulas and stuff can lead to that outcome. We want to serve transit-dependent people, make sure we're providing adequate service to those all-day riders. Those are people who are not just commuting to work, but rely on the bus for everyday activities. Again, we want to promote transit, which helps reduce those racial disparities, promotes economic development, connects people to jobs, and again, leverages those other investments. It is very important to the city that the amenities and facilities that Metro Transit provides are provided in an equitable way across the metro, and that things like shelters, heat, real-time information are provided to everybody in the system in an equitable way. We would suggest that they review their facilities through the lens of racial equity and economic equity. Biking and walking are transportation, and we want the Met Council to give that commensurate investment. Biking and walking, quite often, that very important link to really create a network of transportation. We do highlight some of the projects that the city has supported, and we want to reiterate our support. We have been very strongly in support of completing the C line and the D line as the next bus rapid transit projects. We, in the resolution about Botno LRT, that was really emphasized, is that these create important connections so that Minneapolis residents can access those light rail investments. We want, of course, to continue the progress on the Orange Line, Highway BRT. We express our ongoing support for the Blue Line and Green Line extensions. The West Broadway Midtown corridors are busy and in need of investment, and we want to continue to advance enhancements for those corridors. And we also want to continue to partner and to advance the Nicollet Central streetcar. Some other things that we think the Metropolitan Council can really do to benefit the region is to assess shared mobility and autonomous vehicles and really understand what the implications are going to be for roadway and capacity, and help us be prepared as a region to be there. And there are lots of efforts to measure the performance of transportation systems, and Robin Hutchison had a few recommendations that some of those metrics, they don't focus on people moved, they focus on cars moved, and doesn't benefit transit. We really need to look at people moved. Also, they should be looking at, is this transit accessible to the people who need it, and not just how much longer would your trip be compared to a car, for example. The Met Council has adopted a position to basically pivot away from expansion of highway infrastructure, and we would, I think, agree with that direction. And we have some specific recommendations about giving transit a priority and maximizing high occupancy vehicle lanes to help accomplish that. On the topic of aviation, the Met Council has a role to review the Metropolitan Airport Commission long-range plans, capital plans, and also to say, is the overall capacity of the system working? And we just want them to be much more deliberate to develop metrics that look at, well, what are the impacts on the people and the communities around the airport too? What is the impact on health and livability? And just to include that in their evaluation. Topic water resources. The role of the Met Council on water supply can be somewhat controversial also, and I would say that we support them playing a role in a technical analysis to look at the adequacy of the water supply and help communities plan for what they need to do in the future. I think this is especially true for some groundwater communities that might need to look at alternatives. For the wastewater system, cities pay a large bill for their volume-based charge, and that hits our resident customers directly as well. So that's one of the reasons why we really want investments in wastewater to be prudent, and therefore we have some suggestions to require minimum densities before we expand any of that system. SAC, we have a number of recommendations regarding SAC. Certainly one of the biggest concerns, I think, from a city's perspective is that SAC is often a surprise, large, one-time charge and a big obstacle for small businesses. So we really emphasize that we need to overcome these barriers for small business. We need to simplify SAC. We had previously adopted a position that their SAC should not be charged for outdoor seating, and we carry that over into this document as well. When it comes to regional parks, people who use them say that they're one of the greatest amenities that we have as a region. They're highly valued. The problem is that they tend to be used by older white people to a much greater degree, and they're just simply not used equitably. So we would like to really encourage Met Council to do more to ensure that parks are used equitably. One suggestion is just to increase transportation options to the regional parks. On housing, Minneapolis supports quality, affordable, and stable housing that meets the needs of all residents at all stages of life. So we want to provide a range of housing options. Housing is another topic where there can be disagreement about the role of the Met Council. One thing that the Met Council does is look at what is the need for affordable housing and at each kind of range of affordability, and then it allocates to communities, here's your share and this is how you can do your part. It then uses its role in land use, and it uses this in grants to try to help advance having every community involved in providing affordable housing. And we think that that is a valuable role and very important to meet the needs that we have as a region. And we're also encouraging the Met Council to have a regional perspective on a lot of the same challenges that the city is approaching. How do we encourage that mixed income housing? How do we preserve naturally occurring affordable housing? How do we prevent displacement from gentrification or other pressures? And regarding Section 8, this is consistent with, I think, what the city has said, to try to encourage property owners, management companies to accept vouchers. The Met Council runs a housing authority. We think they're in a position to help coordinate better so that people have more mobility across jurisdictions, and to encourage project-based Section 8 in those communities that are currently where there's not a lot of housing choice available. Again, climate change is something that we should be looking at together. We have to meet state and federal air quality standards together. And we would like to see the Met Council develop a climate action plan for the region with specific goals. The Met Council has committed to looking at everything through a lens of climate impacts, and that is a good step. We just have some specific suggestions. Again, when it comes to the topic of economic competitiveness, we will not succeed as a region unless we address the racial disparities that exist. The population is currently about 24% people of color in the region. It will be 40% by 2040. If these disparities persist, we won't meet our full potential, and we'll be leaving people behind. So we encourage recommendations that help address that issue. We also have a labor shortage on the horizon, and it's very important that we retain and attract a talented workforce here. And what people expect is, again, that range of housing options We need to provide sufficient affordable housing. People expect a robust transit system. So those are some of the things that we would suggest. And we have a lot of great physical assets in the region, and we think the Met Council is in a position to really maximize that by mapping, visualizing some of those assets together, like freight rail and industrial land, other valuable land use. And we recognize that the international airport and all the other supporting airports are extremely valuable to our economic competitiveness, to businesses, and to our residents. So we want to support the health of the airport. We also think that managing some of the negative impacts of the airport helps ensure the long-term sustainability of the airport. So again, that was kind of a high-level overview, and we didn't get into a lot of specifics, but do you have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Olson. I know at least one council member has some ideas that he wants to bring up. I just wanted to say a couple things about this effort. First is just to kind of reiterate to colleagues, this is the first time that the city of Minneapolis has developed in one place kind of a way to state our policy positions relating to the Met Council and regional governance. So this was it was a new effort. It was a big effort. I know that Ms. Olson has spent a lot of time working with city staff, because we do engage with the Met Council and reflect policy positions, often though in response to individual planning efforts or project efforts, because there are often opportunities for jurisdictions to send in their comments, their feedback. So there are ways that we are providing feedback to the Met Council on a regular basis today, but it doesn't exist in a space like this. Couple other things just for you to know.
Yes.
One is that we have had engagement from some Met Council members who encouraged us to be more specific or transparent, maybe that's not the best word, but advocating around our city positions around Met Council issues. And so we've had some encouragement from that end. And then a reminder that there's a gubernatorial election next year. And along with that comes, we know we will have a new governor. And a new governor has an opportunity to appoint all Met Council members. So we could have some significant change on the Met Council. And again, that ends up being sort of a good reason for us to have in writing some positions, some of which have been implied positions from the city of Minneapolis, but maybe never quite stated on a piece of paper before. So just want to say thank you for this work. I anticipate this will be a changing product. It may not need to be updated every year, and it's going to certainly be a work in progress. So I think Councilmember Andrew Johnson had some thoughts to share.
Thank you.
Or recommendations for some discussion.
Thank you, Chair Glidden. And I just wanted to thank and compliment Ms. Olson on this document. I think it's very solid, and I know you were able to incorporate a lot of feedback from many different parties, and I think it's a very well-rounded document. You know, and because it's the first time around, I always think there's kind of this retrospective look when it gets to committee after you incorporate those changes. And so I had a couple comments, and then one thing I did want to actually add to the document today. It just for points of discussion on parks and trails, you know, in the future years, and maybe even, you know, if it's possible to work on something until next, until this is in front of the council, adding some language about wildlife and sustainable land management under parks and trails, I think would be helpful. I think we have a lot of opportunities there to not just promote access to parks and equitable use of parks, but also to help preserve sustainable practices in parks and to help make sure that wildlife considerations are being maintained, especially in regional park assets, which are so interconnected together. And then on the trends and measures component, I think there is an opportunity to add something in there about prioritizing the most vulnerable transit users. Very similar to complete streets. We have some great measurements that we are bringing up in this, but I think a little more on that would be helpful.
Okay.
And then the one that I want to go ahead and make a motion on, I'll actually email this out. I have a paper copy, but unfortunately it has a typo on it, so I'm going to send out the email version. Is just to add under projects for transit, something that we've been working on quite a bit, but I think would be important to call out as a priority. This is very substantial for not just my ward, but other wards as well. Is really Hiawatha Avenue and the light timing along there. And I know you did mention a bullet point, or you do have a bullet point above projects, which somewhat deals with this, but I wanted to specifically have this included and called out because it has such a massive impact. If you add up all of the delays and changes in behavior, and it's bad from an environmental standpoint. It pushes more traffic onto residential streets, which then increases the risk of pedestrian incidents as well. And it's just a major source of stress and frustration for people across the metro. And so I sent that language out, and that's under projects to add in implementing technologies and changes to improve timing of traffic both on and crossing Hiawatha Avenue, including reducing the disruption of traffic flows by Blue Line operations. And I know that we actually have some specific technologies that we're working with traffic engineers and talking with Met Transit on, but I think elevating it would only help increase the likelihood of that happening. So I'll go ahead and make that motion.
All right, so Councilmember Johnson has made a motion to include the language that he read, which is specific to improving traffic flow along Hiawatha. I'll say, without being someone who's been intimately involved in this, I know this has been sort of a long-standing, ongoing discussion of continued evaluation. Any discussion or questions? And I want to invite, I know that Ms. Olson, you got a heads up, I think, from Councilmember Johnson that he wanted desired some more specific language here. Any discussion? All right, so all in favor on that, Council President, us on another one? Okay. On that, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We've added that language.
Thank you.
Anything else, Councilmember Johnson?
No, I really appreciate that,
Okay.
Chair Glidden. And thank you again, Ms. Olson and the IGR team for this. It's great that we have this position paper.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Olson, I'm looking at the Parks and Trails section too, and one of the thoughts that I have is we could be more clear about supporting the need for increased funding in the regional park system. I mean, I think the amount of bonding we get is the same as we got 20 years ago, and the operation and maintenance funding continues to be static, and of course costs have gone crazy. So, and I know, even the legacy funds and that kind of thing, which can support some of the, natural habitat that you're talking about, we just don't get our share of those funds. And, I know they've done some work about seeing what percentage of those funds are generated here, and we are a big loser in that. So that kind of thing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I think that is important recommendation. I think, why don't we just see if we can work with staff on that and some of the other suggestions, and
yeah, we'll do that.
I think that shouldn't stop moving this forward right now, but we'll kind of take that into consideration if we can add some language on that. Any other comments, discussion? Not seeing any. So again, thank you very much for your work on this first of its kind product, and all in approval of the policy positions document as a whole, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have first go through on our 2018 legislative policy positions. Ms. Berkman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sasha Bergman with the IGR Department. Today kind of marks the beginning of our preparation for 2018 with our legislative policy positions and legislative agenda. We're going to start today with a high-level walkthrough of our policy positions and some of our IGR staff recommended changes. We anticipate no action on this today, but that these changes could be incorporated with other changes, new policies at a future date, potentially in November. And next week, I will note that we anticipate hearing from the policy liaison team proposals that will be, some of them will be presented before IGR next week, or excuse me, in 2 weeks, by the City Attorney's Office, Public Works Department, and a joint project between CPED Housing and Finance. So I'll draw your attention to the document that's online titled 2017 Legislative Policy Positions, and I'll start on page 4. This is the section Local Government Finance with the most recommended changes by staff. Briefly, we recommend deleting the policy supporting expanding investment authority for local governments because that was accomplished last legislative session. Two statements, one regarding franchise fee authority and one regarding distributing local government aid based on the formula. We recommend adding specific statements about those. Those are not inconsistent with statements that we already have in the legislative program, but we wanted to call them out specifically based on proposals that have surfaced in the last couple of years. We did think, we do recommend some updates to the lodging tax cap policy to kind of add some clarity to it. And then finally, on the simplifying process for local governments to receive the sales tax exemption for purchases of construction materials, and then the preserving state support for state and regional assets located in the city of Minneapolis, we recommend adding those based on some proposals that have surfaced at the legislature in the last couple of years and that we anticipate will continue to come up, in particular in 2018. On page 5, in the capital investment section, we just, at this point, are recommending deleting some of the accomplishments from last session and then adding the new city-supported bonding projects. On page 6, recommending just some formatting changes in the transportation section. On page 7, under the municipal and regional governance section, we recommend deleting the support for local option to extend the on-sale liquor hours for the Super Bowl because that was accomplished last session. And then adding a statement supporting current law regarding local government authority to create special service districts. This is an issue that came up last session and we anticipate could come up, which there was a bill to repeal city authority to create those. Under procurement on page 7, these are some recommended changes from our sustainability staff about state goal setting for purchasing of environmentally friendly products. On page 9, under resources and funding for public safety, these are some recommended updates from our health department regarding mental health and chemical dependency treatment and prevention. Page 10, under public safety section, we recommend deleting the statement regarding geographic restrictions because that was accomplished last legislative session. And jumping to page 12, another update under city livability regarding, monitoring of air quality and focusing on environmental justice. That's recommended from our sustainability office. And then our last staff recommended change at this point is on page 15, and it's just adding some clarity to the support for special legislation for special tax increment financing legislation for the Upper Harbor Terminal, which has already been in our agenda for the last couple of years. With that, I'll just say that if there are no questions at this point, I know that we are reaching out to all of your offices to meet with you to discuss these ideas, the ideas that are coming forward from departments, and any thoughts that you might have and recommended updates for the document. And so if you know, we'll be reaching out to you, but don't hesitate to contact us as well.
Thank you, Ms. Bergman. And I know that some council members have taken advantage of that already and are combing through the document. And it's, you know, we have a lot of existing policy positions, and several new ones are added every year, and we try to make sure that we're pairing that with removing things that do not, for whatever reason, need to be on our list anymore. So I know there's a lot, and I appreciate the outreach. I'm not seeing any immediate questions. So again, to colleagues, this is just a flagging. This is one of our most important roles, is to approve kind of this go-ahead to our team in preparation for next year's session. So with that, I'll move to receive and file. All in approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? That is received. And finally, we have a placeholder here for federal, state, local updates.
Madam Chair, I have a few items to report on. One at the federal level, and that is the whole tax proposal. Again, there's no legislation drafted yet on the tax bill. There's been lots of discussions, many of them, I think, behind closed doors among congressmen and the White House and the Treasury Department. It appears that what the big issue is right now is SALT, state and local tax deduction. Several states, particularly Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, California, are concerned that they are high tax states, particularly property taxes in their state, and many members of those delegations, to bipartisan delegations, and it sounds like many of the Republicans in those states are concerned about the loss of this exemption. So there's been some work done there. Also, and the big concern about that is this is one of the items that would be used to help pay for the tax reductions over time. And there's been some concern, opposition raised on both sides of the aisle on this issue. The second issue is the corporate tax. I think that the administration has suggested it be no higher than 20%. And looking at the numbers, it sounds like it may be needs to be higher. So there's some discussion on that issue. But the question is, will this bill pass? That's a very good question. It will require more debate and discussion. Will it pass soon? I think everyone's now saying possibly end of year, early next year. So I guess my comment, we'll stay tuned and watch this. Another issue, last week, the Senate Commerce Committee passed out a bill on autonomous vehicles. That bill passed out. There were 50-some amendments in committee. The committee agreed that they needed more work on this issue, particularly on the issue of preemption of state and local regulations regarding traffic and parking and things of that nature. So, because the bill, when it was first drafted, basically said we couldn't change any of our rules and regs when it came to highways and roadways and in governing autonomous vehicles. The discussions have begun. They're continuing. There's a meeting tomorrow sponsored by the United States Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities. And our representatives will be there to meet with some congressmen from the House on this whole issue of preemption. And I know that's a term we know in the state at the federal level on the whole issue of autonomous vehicles. Madam Chair, I'll stop on the federal and try and answer any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, at the state level, there was a hearing this morning on the security issue at U.S. Bank Stadium. Folks from SMG and also the detective boards testified. Representative Anderson indicated that they had at least end at a certain time, and they will have a continuing discussion of this issue. There were several questions asked about security for large events like the Super Bowl and Final Four. So I assume there may be some inquiries about that in future meetings. This week we had a tour. Ms. Lesh and our staff worked very closely with the city staff and yourselves to have a tour at the House Bonding Committee. Not only was it our projects, but also the universities, the park board, the counties. The purpose of the tour is not only to show our projects and to really try and make it important that these are regional and statewide assets. But also to learn what legislators were thinking. And some of the questions revolved around, should these projects and almost all of these projects, are these really regional or are these really state? And I think we answered this. We have to get better answers and get back when session starts, particularly on some issues dealing with, is this a redevelopment project? Should you, in terms of the Upper Harbor Terminal, there are some issues about why should the state be investing in the storm tunnel, and I think our folks answered that question quite well. Like, we have all these national firms here. Runs into the river, so a lot of themes on those kinds of questions, and other questions about, why should we be doing this if cities can do it on their own, particularly when it came to questions about the amphitheater up at Upper Harbor. There was actually a other proposal for a city in central Minnesota, and one legislator made it clear that there was a amphitheater in his community that was built privately. So we have to work on those kinds of issues. But also the Senate, unfortunately, will not be doing tours. They, due to the concern about the constitutionality of the governor's actions, they still not have been able to resolve that. So the Senate has decided they're going to be running out of funds sooner than the House, so they decided not to do tours. I'm sure that's it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the updates and the work being done to prepare for the 2018 session and everything else. So thank you. With that, I believe we've concluded with our agenda for today, and we are adjourned.